sometimes easier to start speaking to a camera than it is to other human beings, because when you start speaking to another human being, like there's this assumption that we're like interested in having a conversation that is a two-way street, that their input is going to be somehow welcome. And one hates to be rude, but one is not always interested in what other people think about what is on my mind. And sometimes I think it's better just to speak. It's better, like the art of listening, I think is unfortunately, not really taught well, and how to really just listen without like the intention to interpret, to not interpret, not to try to problem solve, not to try to really weigh in, not to like try to like upgrade another person's thinking or point of view, but just to listen and not assume that there's something that we know that the other person needs to hear, when they're sort of like just trying to convey where they're at, because what that does is, when a person sort of like tries to turn a conversation that isn't really a conversation into, a back and forth, what it does is it really kind of interferes with the person like really staying on their track and really trying to accurately describe, their inner world, or what their thoughts are on something, and they're kind of working it out. And it's kind of like, sometimes it's kind of like, we need, even as adults, we sort of need to give each other sort of the room, to play the way we would give, a toddler the room to figure out, how to, figure out how a toy works, or figure out how, like what kind of block goes through, what kind of shape, and like one of those little things, where you got squares, you got star pegs, square pegs, round pegs, and the child is like trying to figure out how to do it. And I think often what people try to do in conversations is, instead of letting the person sort of figure out how to do it themselves, and providing them, somebody who's just sort of there to help them, sort of feel like they're just not like talking to themselves, and sort of help them feel encouraged to like figure something out within. Often people like sort of want to get in the way of that by, it's like the ways some kind of like self-centered parent might get in the way of like a child trying to sort of figure out how to operate the the different pegs, and then it's like, look, this is how you do it. It's really easy. And it's kind of just, well, I mean, as soon as you do that, the child's going to kind of lose interest in figuring out how to do it themselves, and it kind of defeats the purpose of the toy, because the toy is there to preoccupy them and to show them not how just the toy works, but how their own mind works. And so, just to be a good listener, it's so valuable, and it's yet unfortunately, people's attention spans, I guess, are pretty low nowadays. Everyone wants to be entertained. Everyone wants to be important. Everyone wants to have the great idea that is going to be the solution to your problem. Everyone's an expert at everything nowadays. You can't just it's like, humility is not just about accepting that you're not, the best at everything, but accepting that, what you can provide to others is not always so obvious and tangible, and what you can provide to another just by, being present with them as they are sort of being present with themselves and touching into their own, inner world, touching the parts of themselves that they're not, that they haven't fully found, fully understood, and, learning how to excavate and reshape what is on the inside. That's a process that we, it's something we all have to do. We all kind of have to think out loud sometimes to figure out where we're at, and it's helpful when we have other people in our lives, but since a lot of times we don't, I do think talking to a camera is a pretty good substitute for that. And it does help me organize my thoughts, sort of it helps me channel what direction I want to put my energy in, how to sort of make peace with things that are kind of difficult inside of me sometimes. And so I don't know, today I was feeling kind of prickly, kind of annoyed. It's trying to make peace with the fact that a lot of the times, when I speak, when I really try to play with ideas and try to show, not only, it's not that I'm trying to really show the world something, although, I think when, the world does, or when people do sort of recognize what I'm trying to get at, that is sort of underneath the surface of, the surface level expression. I'm usually the way I speak is not so much always on the surface of, a literal, statement that I'm making about myself. A lot of times, I'm trying to, I'm sort of trying on a character to express a certain point of view that does exist within myself, but it's not that's the only point of view that exists within myself. And I think most people kind of forget that there's different competing voices inside of their minds, and there's different emotional sort of characters that live inside of us. And to really be a full human being, you kind of have to allow yourself to play around and try to sort of put yourself in your own shoes, but realize that you have different shoes inside of you that you need to wear, and to sort of give each one of those sort of feelings and thoughts and things that we've absorbed in the world, expression, and to sort of allow them to have their day in court, and to sort of steel man, the different positions that we hold within ourselves, to see what is it that our heart really agrees with. It's one thing to adopt a set of beliefs because we sort of feel we're supposed to, but it's another thing to really try on all the different things that the world has presented, and some of the And it's kind of hard, because like a lot of times, like, what we've absorbed unwittingly is, there's a lot of like dark implications to a lot of the things that exist within the world. And some of the dark implications are, they're hidden within the places that are held to be the most lofty and, pious and high-minded. And, but behind that is often a lot of like really like conflicting cognitive dissonance that, we observe it, but we don't often really fully give voice to it. And so like there's this different code of ethics that lives in the part of us that is like this unresolved, like, well, they don't, like, these like, authority figures, they don't really seem to live exactly the way that they, say they do. And they seem like very vehement, and it seems like very dangerous to oppose them openly. But it's like, they're practicing, they're preaching all this stuff, but they're not really practicing it. And so it's like, what is practiced, that is more like what the inner part of us goes like, oh, okay, this is like the real way that we have to do it, but we have to kind of like pretend that things are some other way. It's like the world is like a nice place, and there's justice, and everything, the government is a nice thing, and religion is a nice thing, and people are just fundamentally good, and they're not, they're kind, and they'll help you if you need them, but it's like, I don't know, is that really how the world works? Like, what's emotionally true is often what is actually true, because like if there's some part of us that's like a dog that it's like, I don't want to get near this water. It's like you have like this reaction to certain circumstances where you feel like you're supposed to participate in this because everyone's like, oh yeah, just come along, it's great, we're all having a good time, but you're just like, ugh, I don't want to, get me out of here, I don't want to, it's like something's off, and it's like it's like, you want to participate in the world, but it's like, how do you do it in a way that honors what is really true on the inside? And it's like, to find that, we kind of have to, I don't know, the way I do it is I do creative writing, and I do creative expression, and I really just try to like accept that, even though the world is an ugly thing a lot of the times, that, what's behind, other people is not necessarily just their survival strategy, which can be very caustic and malicious, but that there's something that is common, to all of us, that is motivating all this. And, that, understanding that, and sort of making peace with that, and kind of like allowing to see ourselves what really is, that really is the first step to forgiveness. Because if you're in denial about the world that you live in and about people's motives, what are you really forgiving? You're not forgiving the reality. You're not allowing the reality. And you're not necessarily looking at how that reality is not only out there, but it's also in here and in your heart, and it's lived there, and it's left its impression. And if you don't really deal with that, and if you don't really look at that, then you're just delusional, and you're functioning on a distorted point of view in order to try to maintain a comfortable illusion. So yeah, I don't know, like a lot of the things that I do on this channel are probably going to be confusing to most people, and a lot of the things are probably going to stir things up in people, and they're either going to like tune out and not be interested, or they'll want to argue with me in some way, and I sort of expect that. But this is not really what I do is not really so much about anyone else. It's just about, me sort of making peace with what it is that I have to live with, because I'm the one who has to live with it. Anyhow, y'all have a good one.